Let's turn to Nehemiah. Nehemiah 4. You know, this is, it would be impossible to have read all of this, so I hope you're reading along at home. It's just not possible, but I am going to read to you part of Nehemiah 4 today. Now, I want you to remember, Nehemiah had a vision. God said, I want you to go and help in Jerusalem, rebuild the walls. And Nehemiah prayed about this for 4 months. And then he went to the king and he said, I need some time off. And the king says, how much? And he goes, well, like 16 years. And the king goes, well, sure, go. And then Nehemiah goes, okay, well, if he bought that, maybe he'll buy the rest of this. And so he says, I need letters of safe passage to get there, because he's not in Jerusalem, he's a ways away. And he goes, okay, anything else? Thinking, surely this isn't going to end soon. He goes, yes, we need lumber. We need lumber to rebuild the gates. And he goes, sure. Now, Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer, and that's a big job. He has to make sure the king doesn't get poisoned. He might, but the king won't get poisoned. So, basically, we are now he has arrived in Jerusalem. And let me share from Nehemiah's story. Now, when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he mocked the Jews. And he said in the presence of his associates and in the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore things? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish it in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burn ones at that? Tobiah the Ammonite was beside himself, and he said, that stone wall they're building, any fox going up on it would break it down, so really don't worry about it. Hear our Lord, for we are despised. Turn their taunt back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt, and do not let their sins be blotted from your sight. And they hurled insults in the faces of the builders. So Nehemiah says, so we rebuilt the wall. And that wall was joined together in half its height, keep in mind this phrase, for the people had a mind to work. Now, when Sanballat and Tobiah heard, and the others heard about this repairing, they were pretty angry. And they went forward. They wanted to get in there before the gaps were closed. And they plotted to come together and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion. So Nehemiah says, we prayed to our God and set a guard as protection against them day and night. But Judah said, the strength of the burden bearers is failing, and there's too much rubbish, so we're unable to work on the wall. And our enemies said, they will not know or see anything before we come upon them and kill them and stop the work. And when the Jews who lived near them came, they said to us 10 times, from all the places where they live, they will come up against us. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I stationed the people according to their families, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And after I looked these things over, I stood up and said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Fight for your kin, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. And when the enemies heard that our plot was known, their plot was known to us, and that the Lord had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. And from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and the other half held spears, shields, bows, and body armor. And the leaders posted themselves behind the whole house of Judah, who were building the wall. The burden bearers carried their loads in such a way that each labored on in work with one hand, and the other hand they held a weapon. Each of the builders had a sword strapped to his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread out, and we are separated from one another on the wall. Rally to us whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet. Our God will fight for us. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears until the break of dawn, from the break of dawn till the stars came out. And I said to the people at the time, let every man and his servant pass the night inside Jerusalem, so that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. And so neither my brothers nor my servants and I, or the men in the guard, ever took off our clothes. And each kept a weapon in his right hand. Wow. We're making our way deeper into Nehemiah. I mean, remember, we're rebuilding the city. And it's not only about rebuilding the city, it's about rebuilding the self-respect of the Jewish people. So we're learning today that there are enemies to progress, aren't there? Sometimes our enemies want to keep us vulnerable and open to attack. These enemies enjoyed the fact that Jerusalem was defenseless. They enjoyed the fact that their attempts on the city hindered progress. And remember times, the workers had to hold the sword with one hand and work with the other? And some had to be taken off their jobs and put on the guard line. And then the enemies were stopped. And the burden bearers, the porters, had to handle their loads, only with one hand, because they got a weapon in the other. But there were other enemies as well, like paying taxes and keeping the economy going. There were injustices about how the affluent Jews used this situation to exploit the needy, their own people. Chapter 5 tells us that there were people who sold their children to pay taxes. They couldn't raise their own food, so they had to buy it, and the creditors charged an interest, even if it was illegal to do it. But Nehemiah, with God's help and the support of the people, stood up to the enemies, and the people were able to rebuild the wall. You see, like vision, Nehemiah convinced them that they didn't need to let somebody else take their vision away from them. And so the people began to sacrifice, and they gave up their day jobs in order to build and protect those who were doing the wall. And the community came together so that there could be healing. And 2 sentences I really want to focus on the time we have here together is, so we rebuilt the wall, and the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. And the second is about the burden bearers carrying their loads. They had, one hand was doing the building and one hand was holding the weapon. We're moving into, we've been in exciting times, but the times here at CUCC are just getting more exciting. I began this journey with you on February 1st, 2015. We've done some good work, We've learned about the history, the mission. We've talked about how leadership works or doesn't here. We've done some conversation about how we're connected all the way around. And I know we talked about the future. The transition team spent months walking with you on this. And I know that there were a number of you who wanted us to go faster. But the intentional interim process is about moving at a good pace, doing what you need to do, but mostly it's about allowing you time to breathe. I think we've done good work. I've enjoyed every moment of it. But I really think the best benefit that came to community was that you had time to breathe. You, like Nehemiah, have entered into this time and this place faithfully and prayerfully. Now, obviously, we're not rebuilding the city, we're not rebuilding walls, and our gates not demolished. But Pastor Steve retired after 14 years. It was time to take a breath. So in deciding that you were going to do the intentional interim process, you decided, like the Jewish people, to come together, for the people had a mind to work. Well done, my friends. Well done. And that second sentence about the burden bearers carried their loads in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and with the other held a weapon. Can I just point out, that's really hard to do. I mean, I'm a multitasker. I drive Ken crazy. But I don't know that I can do that. There are times you've got your mind going one thing and you can do other things. But I don't know. Having something in one hand while I really try to do, I don't think so. So let's go for a better verse. From that day on, half of the servants worked on construction and held all that stuff. And the leaders posted themselves outside the wall. The people of Jerusalem were building the wall. Now, you may already know this, but the African American church, many of them have this tradition that comes out of the Bible, like Nehemiah. They have armor bearers. Do you know that? There's armor bearer. And the little research says an armor bearer is someone who's a trusted member of a church and they're appointed by a spiritual leader to perform certain duties. Now, in the biblical days, the armor bearer was the one who held the sword and shield and stood beside the leader, offering protection from the enemies who were going to come up against them, willing to sacrifice their lives if necessary. And today, this person is still a protector in the sense that, usually a he, let's be honest, stands beside a spiritual leader who's doing all sorts of things. Now, yes, once upon a time, I had an armor bearer. I was asked to speak at a women's conference in Cleveland in 2010. And this is one of those rare African-American good-sized churches that had a woman pastor, called a woman pastor. And the Reverend Dr. Wilma Johnson, who passed away this last week at the age of 64 after cancer, was the epitome of graciousness. Each one of us who were speaking was assigned an armor bearer. So I had a seminary student, lovely woman, who was my armor bearer. I had no idea what to do with her. But she was generous and let me go. She was my driver. She was my contact for the room I was using and for the AV people. She even drove me back to the hotel when I forgot my DVD for the workshop. It was lovely to have experienced that kind of hospitality. But in ministry, there have been other times I've had such an armor bearer. I've had them who bolstered me up when my enemies came too close. I had armor bearers who spoke honestly with me when I needed it. I've had armor bearers who interpreted what others were saying that I couldn't understand. I've had armor bearers who advocated for me when I didn't have it in me to advocate for myself. Oh, it is lovely to be so cared for. It is lovely to know that someone had my back, and they also had the guts to come to my front and tell me what I was doing wrong. I want you to remember this as the exciting days are coming when you welcome your new pastor. Your pastor will have a pastor relations committee, transition team, something. And they'll do their job. But I want to invite you to all be your pastor's armor bearers. I don't think you'll need to hold a sword. But there will be times that your pastor needs your support, your honesty, and maybe even your protection. Nehemiah was there for the Jewish people, and they in turn were there for each other. They were great examples of being armor bearers for one another. I ask this of you because I already know you're good at this. For your pastor and for each other. Continue to be armor bearers for one another. And be ready to be that for your new pastor. Let us pray. You call us, God, to be people of vision. You call us to be who you need us to be. And in these days ahead, thank you for walking beside us. Amen.